Hey everybody, welcome. My name is Nick, and we want to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever it is that you're watching this. We want to say welcome to the online space of The Gathering. And this is a pretty exciting thing that we've got going on here. The Gathering is made up of two different churches who have decided to partner together as one, and in a time and space where there is a lot of polarization and people who don't agree on everything, often polarizing and walking away from one another. We've decided, even though we've got some cultural differences and traditional differences, that the things that matter most to us we share in common. And so let's do some life together. And it's kind of hard to explain to you how exciting this partnership has been. And we are glad that you are getting at least a taste of that here in this online space. Now, if you want to find out a little bit more about who we are, a good way to do that, of course, since you're already online here, is go to a website, everettgathering.com. You can check us out right there, and you can learn a little bit about who we are, particularly our core values. If you want to check those out, you can see the values that matter, and those are really the things that draw these two groups together. And so if you want to check that out, you are welcome to do that. Now, usually we just use two words to describe ourselves, this union that we've created together, and that is with the words cautious and curious. We are a cautious group because many of us have grown up with religion or surrounded by religion or exposed to religion. Many of us a religion called Christianity. And we have seen religion used in ways that's helpful and positive and beneficial. And undoubtedly we have seen it used that way. But many of us have also seen religion used in ways that is more harmful and toxic and exclusive. And many of us, or even some of our friends and family, have been hurt or harmed by that type of religion. And so many of us start to find ourselves a little bit cautious about organized religion. You might even say a little skeptical about organized religion. And I say this every week, but I do know that that is sort of an odd tension because we are at least a loosely organized group of religious folk who are also skeptical of organized religion. But we actually think that religion is probably best when there is a healthy dose of caution involved. We think that that tension actually helps keep things healthy rather than toxic. Now, the other thing we use to describe ourselves, the other word, is curious. We're a group that likes to ask a lot of questions. We like to ask questions about things we don't know, and we're certainly going to do that today, actually. We got a story, and I'll just be honest, there's a lot that I don't know about this story, and it's perfectly good to ask questions in this group. But we don't just ask questions about things that we don't know. We actually spend a lot of time asking questions about things that we think that we do know, because we've discovered that it's usually in those places we think we already have everything figured out that our blind spots hide. And it turns out there's a lot of things that have been handed down to us, ways of thinking, ways of believing, that have been handed down to us that perhaps we've never fully challenged. And we think that, God is strong enough and secure enough that he can withstand a little bit of our questioning. And so we like to ask questions about those things because sometimes we question some things handed down to us and discover, maybe that's something that isn't working anymore. Or maybe it never did. Or maybe it was never something we really had to fully buy into. And maybe there's some better ways of thinking about it. So we're a group that's open to those kind of questions and always seeking to do that ourselves. Now, what we're going to be doing here in this online space for the next few minutes is basically an online worship service. Some of you live far away or just prefer being at home, and we want you to feel a part of this community. Now, we're working very hard over the next few weeks to get the technology updated in our new facility so that we can just live stream what's happening on Sunday morning so you get a chance to kind of feel the atmosphere of this unique group of people. But for now, we'll have this online experience here, and that's going to have everything you'd kind of expect in a worship service. Billy, our worship leader, is going to come on the screen here. He's going to lead us in some time of singing. You can sing along if you'd like to, or you can just listen to the music. I suppose if you're watching this later, you could scrub ahead if you're just opposed to listening to music. But in between these two songs, he's going to help us sing. In between it is a reflective video. And so this is a good chance for you to just kind of maybe settle down, ease into the day, wherever you're at. Okay, maybe you're not, for me anyway, it takes a little primer to start thinking about God. Sometimes my life is busy with a lot of different things going on and a lot of different things on my mind. And so music and worship becomes a time for me to kind of reorganize my thoughts, settle my mind down, and begin focusing on God. So if you want to do that, you're welcome to do that. Then we'll get into, after the music, I'll come back on, and we've got odd story today that we'll be discussing. One of the weirdest interactions Jesus has with a person. For my money, I think it is the weirdest interaction Jesus has with a person in the Gospels. And so we're going to look at that story today. And then afterwards, we're going to wrap up with the time of communion. Now, in our in-person gatherings, we invite everybody to come to the table and take communion together, and we have everything prepared for them. But in the online space, you'll obviously have to gather a couple things together if you would like to take communion. So what you'll need is something for the bread and the cup. For the bread, you just need a cracker or maybe a little chunk of bread, nothing too big, but you can grab that. And then for the cup, you'll just need some juice or maybe you have some wine left over from last night's dinner. You can get something like that out. And we're just going to carve a little time out here with another song where you can take a moment and privately reflect on the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus and take communion yourself if you would like to do that. And then, of course, we'll wrap everything up with some announcements and some things that are happening here as we move towards spring and actually towards Easter already, if you can believe it. Okay? All right, that's where we're going. Why don't we just let Billy take over here? He can lead us in some music, and then I'll see you back here on the screen in just a few moments.
Song of all songs is the song we sing. Song of our sounds having symphony. Songs of love to you from us all. Songs of praise, you're the one we adore. We're gonna sing out aloud as heaven is us and comes down in this day that we live. We'll show our love with such awesome praise. You are great and greatly to be praised. In all the earth, you are strong and powerful. In all the world, in all the heavens, you are God, so wonderful. All of heaven knows your name. You are great and greatly to be praised. Song of all songs is the song we sing. Sound of all sounds having symphony. Songs of love to you from us all. Songs of praise, you're the one we adore. We're gonna sing out aloud as heaven is us and comes down in this day that we live. We'll show our love with such awesome praise. You are great and greatly to be praised. In all the earth, you are strong and powerful. In all the world, in all the heavens, you are God, so wonderful. All of heaven knows your name. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. I see a generation rising up to take their place with selfless faith, selfless faith. I see a near revival stirring as we pray and seek. We're on our knees, we're on our knees, yeah. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. In the and heal my heart and make it clean. Open up my eyes to the things unseen. Show me how to love like you have loved me. And break my heart for what breaks yours. And everything, everything I am for your kingdom's cause. As I walk from earth into eternity. Eternity, yeah. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. 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 Hosanna in the highest.
All right, that's great. That was a little video there talking about Ash Wednesday. And just thought I'd start with just a little reminder that we will be having an Ash Wednesday service in person, not online, unfortunately, but in person this Wednesday, February 14th at 6 p.m. at the building. And I know it is also Valentine's Day, but it is the beginning of the season that is called Lent, which is sort of a run-up to Easter. It's a period of reflection where we focus our thoughts and minds towards the cross, and that with Ash Wednesday service anyway, the idea is that there's many things that captivate our minds and our thoughts that perhaps we'd like to let go of and to give over to Jesus himself. And so we're going to have like a little 45-minute service where we sing and we worship and we lay some of those things down before Jesus. And so if you'd like to join us on Wednesday, we'd love to have you there at 6 p.m. Now, the last week or so have been kind of weird for me, the last several weeks, because my daughter got her driver's license, which is crazy in a lot of ways. But one of the ways that's crazy is it's just impossible that I could possibly be old enough to have a child who is old enough to drive. I mean, how am I staying so young when she's getting so old, right? And it has me just thinking back all nostalgic because her birthday happened. And we were thinking about her birthday, and I was remembering how hard it was to choose her name. I mean, do you remember this? I mean, those of you who are parents, you remember the pressure that's there to choose a name for your child? I mean, it really is sort of hard to do to choose a name for a child because it feels like there's so much weight on it, you know? Like, you don't want to mess it up. It's going to be a human being's name for their whole life. I mean, I guess they could change it, but that's a hassle. They probably won't. So you're probably naming someone for their whole life. And I remember being a parent, you know, here trying to come up with a name. And my wife and I were very, very just overwhelmed in trying to choose a name because you're trying to think of, like, what'll be a good name. And part of that is you're trying to think through, like, okay, we don't want to choose a name that kids will use in school to tease them, right? And so you're trying to think about all the insults that kids might come up with based on names that you would choose, you know, like what rhymes with this name, so we don't want to name them that, or then they'll be teased with this rhyme. And you're trying to avoid that because you know how cruel kids can be in school, and you're trying to kind of help avoid your kid from being insulted. Now, I remember those days as a kid, don't you? You know, when people would throw around insults, and kids can be really mean, and there was a kid in my neighborhood who was teasing me, insulting me, and I was getting all upset about it. And I remember my dad told me it was trying to encourage me to move past it and ignore the insults with the best advice I think that he really knew at the time. It was the same advice that he probably heard as a kid. And it was that simple phrase that you've probably heard many times: sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. You ever heard that one? I mean, of course you have. But we all know that words do hurt, don't they? Some have said it this way: not sticks and stones, but more like drones. They drop out of the sky and crush us. I mean, insults and being called names really can hurt. Sometimes we'd rather be nameless than have the mean names that people often call us. Well, we're doing a series called The Nameless Ones, and we're looking at 5 women in the Gospel of Mark that the writer identifies as great examples of faith. The writer holds them up as great examples of faith, but they're 5 women and we never know their names, which is interesting because you'd think that if the gospel writer was going to elevate some people of great faith, you'd choose one of the kind of the big names. I mean, there's 12 disciples there that we all know their names, and you would think that maybe they would be the people that the gospel writer is holding up as examples of great faith. And yet most of the time it appears that Mark is actually contrasting the lack of faith of these big name disciples with the exemplary faith of the nameless women. And so today we're going to look at another one of these nameless ones and how they exemplify faith. Now, the problem for our nameless woman today is not so much that she is not identified with a personal name, but the problem in this story is that Jesus calls her a name that is just very demeaning and insulting. This is the story of the Syrophoenician woman who Jesus calls a bitch. What? Got your attention? Okay, this is a bizarre story, so let's read it together. It is in Mark chapter 7. It's only a few verses long, like 7 verses long, and it starts in verse 24. From there he set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know that he was there, yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin, and she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." And when she went home, she found the child gone and lying on the bed, and found the child lying on the bed and the demon gone. Now, this is one of the weirdest stories in the Gospels. I mean, it is a very strange interaction here. It's unlike maybe any other. In fact, it has got to be the most unique story of Jesus having an interaction with a person in the Gospels. And it's a story that leaves us with a lot of questions. And I have spent quite a bit of time over the years with this story, and I still have a lot of questions about what is going on here. Now, I'd like to help us think about this story today, but I want to be honest up front. I don't have any definitive answers to the riddles of this story. I personally still have questions about this story, which is frankly true about a lot of the Bible text. Now, many people have suggested some interpretations or way of reading this story, and some of them I think are helpful and others not so much. But the truth is, none of us knows exactly what is going on in this story. So what I'd like to do today is share some of the most common interpretations of this story. And along the way, I'll tell you what I think of them, and I'll tell you which one I prefer. But if you don't like my perspective, then as always, you can just tell me to go kick rocks and think of the story and read the story however you like. But however you read this story, I think there's a common takeaway about faith that is important to all. And so we'll conclude with that. But the big question really in this story is, why does Jesus call a woman a bitch? I mean, did you catch that in the story? I know we got it toned down a little bit in these English translations here, but what happens is a woman comes and asks for help for her child who it says has an unclean spirit, which could mean, we don't know what that looks like. Mark doesn't tell us. I mean, we learned already that Peter's mother-in-law had a fever, and that was probably attributed to some sort of demonic presence. So it could be a physical illness. We don't really know. But she comes and asks Jesus for help, and Jesus calls her a dog. But it says that in English here, and that really is the word, but kind of colloquially, it is worse than that. Calling someone a dog back then was sort of the same as it is now. It was a slang term, an insult, and the closest parallel would be calling someone a bitch, like a female dog, right? But the idea of not just calling them like an animal, but that there's sort of an insult associated with it, like when we would use the word bitch. And that is the force of this insult. Now, you should know that this is probably also a bit of an ethnic slur. It's a common slur that was used against Gentiles, particularly Romans, but also others. This woman is attributed to be a Canaanite in Matthew's telling. It tells us she's a Gentile here in Mark's version. And so this is probably also intended to be an ethnic slur, as that was a way that Jewish people would sometimes refer to Gentiles that they did not like. And Jesus says here he's there to feed the children, which is probably referring to Jewish people. And then he says, but not you dogs, which is probably an insult with at least a racist nuance. So we have Jesus here calling a woman a bitch with some sort of racist overtones. And I mean, that's weird, right? I mean, I dare you to find another story in the Gospels quite as weird as Jesus' interaction with this woman. I mean, it's just not your normal Jesus interaction in the Gospels. So what in the world is going on here? Well, let me give you a couple options. I'd like to share with you the 3 most common interpretations or reading of this story. And then I'd like to share 2 others with you that are a little less common, but that I find intriguing. Okay, so here is the first one. And the first way of reading this story is that when Jesus calls this woman this insult or this name, well, he just didn't really mean anything bad by it. Now, some scholars try to point out by softening this phrase here, they try to point out that Jesus uses a diminutive variation of the word dog. And that is true in Greek. This is sort of like a variation on the word dog that's more small in nature. So there's a word, it could have meant like a big dog, like a wild dog. But Jesus uses this variation off of that word, which is like a little dog. It means kind of like a small house pet. And they say, well, see, he wasn't really insulting her by calling her this like wild dog, like a bitch. He was calling her this like little house pet dog. And this way of reading the story is an attempt to tame down the language a bit. And it's sort of understandable, right? Because everyone's sort of uncomfortable with Jesus calling this woman a bitch. But really, the solution here doesn't make it much better, because calling someone you bitch versus you little bitch, I don't know that makes things much better. In fact, it might make it worse. And I think it's just sort of unavoidable that this is an insult, and that calling someone this name is insulting and frankly demeaning. And I don't think we do any justice here to the text by trying to pretend that Jesus wasn't actually using a word that was insulting. So this, as you can tell, is not my favorite way of reading the story. Now, another way that's been popular, especially recently in reading this story, is that Jesus is actually a little bit racist and kind of also a little bit sexist. Now, this way of reading the story takes the insult seriously, okay? That Jesus really does mean to insult the woman. When he calls her a bitch, he means it, all right? But the idea here is that Jesus is human as well as divine. Okay? And how does all work? Jesus is both human and he's divine. And so to be fully human, that means there's probably some of humanity in Jesus that bleeds out. And maybe the human side of Jesus was a little bit closed-minded. And so when he meets this woman and he sees her identity as a Gentile, he thinks that because she's non-Jewish, that he doesn't need to help her. And so not only does he turn her away, but due to his kind of humanness, there's some bigotry and some unkindness with which he turns her away. Now, of course, we discover in the story that she responds in a kind of clever and humble way, saying, don't, I'll just take the scraps. Even the dogs get the scraps. And that her response is so clever or humble that it actually changes his mind that maybe he should help non-Jewish people. Now, there's some things about this reading of the story that I actually appreciate. The first thing is that it takes the insult seriously. It doesn't try to wipe it away as like not an insult. It kind of leaves it as an insult, and I appreciate that. The second thing I appreciate about it is it attempts to move the woman from a victim, being called a name, to an influencer, kind of trying to restore respect to her as someone who could argue Jesus into changing his mind. And I appreciate both of those things about this way of reading the story. But ultimately, this one is still a little hard for me to buy also. It doesn't seem to fit with everything that we know about Jesus, especially because we see Jesus interacting with and even healing non-Jewish people. Some great examples of this. Jesus heals a Roman centurion's child in Matthew 8 and Luke 7. Again, a Gentile, a Roman. He would have thought of as a dog probably more than this Canaanite woman. And he doesn't have any sort of insulting interaction there. He just heals. Jesus heals 10 Samaritan lepers in Luke 17. He goes into Samaria. They would also have been looked on by Jewish people probably unfavorably. and they ask for help, just like this woman does. There's 10 of them, and Jesus does not insult them. He just simply heals them, even though most of them do not return in any sort of gratitude. Another example isn't really healing necessarily in a physical sense, but in John 4, Jesus, famously meets the Samaritan woman at the well, and Jesus seems content to talk with her, and even says the divide with the Jewish people and her people is sort of over and unwarranted, and that they should worship together. And so there's lots of interaction stories of Jesus with non-Jewish people, and he doesn't seem to respond the same way. But maybe the clincher for me is the context of this story in the Gospel of Mark. Particularly because right before this, in Mark 7, verses 1 through 23, there's a discussion on clean foods to eat. And Jesus is confronted with his disciples not following Jewish dietary laws. There's some food that's clean and some food that's unclean, right? And that's important in Jewish culture because eating certain foods and not other foods were boundary markers for the Jews. It distinguished them from other non-Jews. And Jesus' disciples are being accused of crossing that boundary marker. And Jesus says that there is no food that we take in that makes us unclean, but only what comes out from the heart. And so he appears to be washing away this Jewish Gentile boundary. And it seems likely to me that Mark intends to follow up that discussion with this story of the Syrophoenician woman, which immediately follows it, to further drive home that point. In fact, he's still even using a food metaphor. So there's lots of reasons here to think that Jesus already felt called to help those who were non-Jewish and didn't insult this woman because of some bigotry that was in his human nature. It's sort of hard to imagine that someone needed to convince Jesus that non-Jews were worthy not only of his ministry, but also of basic kindness because of all we know of Jesus in the rest of the Gospels. Okay, so here is a third way of understanding the story, and this one has been historically a very popular reading, and the idea here is that Jesus is simply testing the woman's faith. So in this way of reading the story, Jesus does call her a mean name, okay? He is calling her a bitch, but in this way of reading the story, he doesn't really mean it. He's testing her to see if she will keep persisting, if she has enough faith to push through the insult and be persistent enough, then he will do what she asks. And so this reading is sort of like he calls her this insult, but sort of with a wink and a nod. And I like that this way of reading the story seems to fit with what we know about Jesus and having him not insult a woman based on prejudice, but it's actually one of the readings I dislike the most. It explains away this insult with sort of a wink and a nod, which seems really too easy by far. And actually, if this is how Jesus does this, it still seems quite cruel. I'll only heal your kid if you accept my insult. And what's more is Jesus does not similarly test anyone else in the Gospels who approaches him for a miracle. So it's sort of difficult to explain why he would in this case and never with anyone else. And there's just no other miracles of Jesus testing someone to see if their faith is worthy of a miracle in this way. And really, in seeking him out, hasn't she already demonstrated the same faith as all the others who have come to Jesus asking for help? So this is not my favorite reading either. Now, these are the three most popular ways of reading this story. But this is such a brief story with such a weird interaction that it seems likely to me that there are probably some cultural things that are going on that aren't apparent on the surface to us when we read this 2,000 years later. And so let me give you an example of some ways that perhaps some further understanding of what might possibly be happening in the culture around Jesus at the time might help us to read this story better. Let me give you two other ways of reading this story. And the first is this, that Jesus is provoking conversation. Now, I actually think this is a really intriguing way of reading this story, because some have suggested that Jesus is interacting with the woman that he recognizes as a part of a Greek philosophical school known as the Cynics. And maybe he recognizes that she herself is a cynic. And if so, that really reshapes how we hear the insult of him calling her a dog. Because in the ancient world, cynics were often called something: dogs. In fact, it's actually what the word cynic actually even means. It's derived from the same word that Jesus uses here as dog. In fact, cynics actually embraced the image of a dog. It sort of started as an insult, but later they turned it into a mascot. And cynics were famous for not having any property. They rejected all conventional values of money and fame and power and reputation. They lived life according to nature with only the bare necessities required for existence. They often lived on the streets in the full glare of the public's gaze, and they were quite indifferent in the face of any insults which might have resulted from their unconventional behavior. And so they got the label dogs, and they wore it proudly. Now, this is interesting, but in fact, some Bible scholars like John Dominic Crossan see Jesus himself as a type of Jewish cynic. That perhaps that's why he recognizes her, is because he himself is sort of a cynic. Now, this woman being this person being a woman also makes sense, because cynics were known for allowing women to philosophize and argue and debate in public, and in the ancient world, that was sort of unique to them. And so perhaps Jesus recognizes her as a cynic and engages her. Now, these cynics, they were also known for their impudent, argumentative style. A brief, common cynic technique was to start a debate or philosophical conversation with a cutting remark or an insult, followed by a question or a brief statement. A sort of insult that was used as an invitation to conversation. And in the context of cynic practice, Jesus then here calling her a dog or insulting her may not be a refusal, but rather a form of engagement. And the woman is not a dog then in the derogatory sense, but rather a legitimate debate partner. Now, this is actually a pretty interesting interpretation. Jesus then is insulting her, but he's doing it as a way of inviting her into a dialogue, because perhaps she is familiar with this way of speaking, and so he is sort of meeting her on her own terms and engaging her in the style and the way that she understands. That's an intriguing way, I think, to read the story. But there's another way that I like maybe a little bit better, and that is that in this story, Jesus is referencing an economic inequality. Now, we're told in the story that the woman is from a city called Tyre. And Tyre is sort of an unusual city. It's located on an island in ancient Syria. And Tyre was on the coast, and being on an island there, it was a major seaport. In fact, interesting note, the first people who started navigating using the stars were from Tyre. And this was important because ships no longer had to hug the coastline, to know where they were. They could actually go out into open water and navigate by the stars. It was like a big technological achievement to navigate by the stars. But what they were also known for, besides shipping, was they were known for a purple dye that was taken out of certain seashells there along the coast. And this dye was very expensive, and in fact, Tyre was historically very affluent. Now, the city of Tyre is also usually known in its association with its sister city called Sidon, which is further in the north. And Sidon was particularly known for its natural resources of trees. the cedars of Lebanon. And King Solomon, back in his day, was actually building the temple, right? And he needed some big timbers for it, and he didn't have any. And so what he did in 1 Kings 5 is he contacted the king of Tyre, because Tyre and Sidon are together. Tyre's in the south on the coast. Sidon is farther north and close to the mountain range, and there were lots of these cedars there that Solomon wanted, and so he made an exchange with the king of Tyre, probably trading food for these cedars of Lebanon that would be shipped down to him so that they could create the temple. And it appears that this sort of trade was established and went on for a long while, even into the time of Jesus. Now, where Jesus has come from is a place called Galilee. It's where he's been right before this story when he goes to the coast in Tyre. And along the Sea of Galilee, kind of an inland lake there, the Galilee was, that valley there, that area, was a breadbasket for Tyre. Lots of agriculture there with fertile plains along the Sea of Galilee. And Tyre, of course, was wealthy from trade of dye and the cedar trees, but they didn't have anywhere to sustain a robust agriculture. And so they traded these expensive goods to Galilee, but they needed Galilee's food. And so scholars have noted that this meant that oftentimes Galileans went hungry in times of food shortages in order to supply the people of Tyre. And so some have suggested that the food in Galilee at the time of this story was in short supply, because just before this, Jesus has had to feed thousands of people in a miraculous way who were in need of food in the Galilean area. And so perhaps little children were literally going hungry because the dogs of Tyre had first access to their food. Now, if this sort of economic reality and inequality is happening here, then when you read this story, the Syrophoenician woman is not some poor, discriminated victim. She is actually one who is in a position of power, economic power, sort of elitist. And now she has come demanding from Galilee not just food, but healing, demanding from Galilee this healing in the person of Jesus. And so when Jesus refuses her, he is refusing to accommodate an entitled woman who is asking for even more. And what this reading of the story does is it brings an economic inequality theme into the story. Jesus is demonstrating a role reversal of the Tyrians and the Galileans, that those who have been first will now be last, and those who are last will now be first, which seems like a sort of Jesus-y thing to do. He's insulting her, but he's challenging her place of privilege. But of course, the woman replies with humility. She says, I don't need to eat first. I'll just have the crumbs from the table. And some have even suggested that her response is an acknowledgement of this economic inequality and her willingness to even undergo some economic loss and share what she has with those needing food. And in this way of reading the story, the nameless woman's faith is not just to push past an insult. Her faith is to see what the disciples could not see, that there is enough for all. Now, this reading of the story is my personal favorite. But however you view the story, it seems likely to me that Mark has placed it strategically to illustrate the faith of this woman, particularly in relation to the 12 disciples. This story is sandwiched right between, that's actually probably a good word because it has relating to food here. This story is sandwiched right between two other stories, the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000. These were miracles where crowds were gathered to see Jesus, one in Galilee and one across the river there in another kind of mostly Gentile area. And what is happening here is in both of these stories, there's a crowd that gathers and they have no food, but they're all kind of centered around the Galilean plains. And so Jesus is talking to them, and there's not enough food to feed the crowds. And the disciples come to Jesus and say, hey, we got all these people here. They've come out to see you, but there's no food. And it does seem odd that there wouldn't be any food for these people, unless, of course, there is a food shortage. And so Jesus asked the disciples, well, what do you have to feed them? And in each story, they only have a few loaves of bread or maybe a few fish. And the disciples know that this is not enough. And they tell Jesus as much. Both stories, okay? He does it one time, and then later he does it again. You'd think by the second time they'd say, like, well, it's not much, but you know what you did on the last time, just do it again. You'd think that they'd have more trust at this point, more faith. But they don't, because in both stories they tell Jesus, we got some food, but it's not nearly enough. Not everyone can eat. Some will be left out. The disciples don't get it. But this nameless woman, she instinctively does. She realizes that when Jesus comes to feed, there is always enough. No one is left out. There will always be leftovers, many crumbs to spare. Because what Jesus is offering is not just for a select few, but it is a bounty that will spill out for all people. And she seems to know that you don't need to push to the front of the line and get yours first. She knows that there is no scarcity of resources, only a scarcity of faith and generosity. She gets what the disciples miss, and Mark appears to be highlighting that for us. Now, there's a lot of ways to read the story of the Syrophoenician woman. But maybe the only truly wrong way to read it is to miss the connection between faith and generosity. The story of the feedings of the multitudes and the Syrophoenician woman illustrate that there is always enough for everyone if we are generous enough to share even the little bits that we have. If we have faith enough to know that we can share and be generous because God will take care of us too. And so Jesus is teaching the disciples and the crowds, and he does it by demonstrating and helping this non-Jewish woman. Either Jesus knows this from the beginning, or he has to be convinced by the nameless woman, however you want to read it. But Mark doesn't seem to be caught up in the controversy of how Jesus came to this conclusion. Mark just seems to be more concerned that we know it, that there is food enough for us all. And that is a great lesson about faith. Generosity is a beautiful expression of faith. We show faith when we are generous. Because we are showing in that moment, when we are sharing what we have with others, we are showing in that moment that we have faith that God will take care not only of them, but us too. When we have faith, when we bring what we have, even if it's just a few loaves or a fish, and we share it with all in need, whether it's Jewish crowds or Gentile crowds, or a poor discriminated woman, or an elitist wealthy woman from Tyre, well, our faith is seen in our willingness to risk generosity. When we are generous with what we have, we demonstrate a faith that God will take care of all of us. So however you read this story, I think the primary question we should ask is not why does Jesus call this woman a bitch, although that is a curious question. I think the primary question that Mark wants us to ask is, who needs your generosity? Jesus, we come to you today, and we are thankful that over and over again we see that you are so generous, that you reach out not to those just like you, but to all, that you have enough in your grace to reach all of us. That you do not just offer your grace to a few select individuals, but that you spill it out for all. And we are inspired by that, and we recognize, Jesus, that there are many today who go without and many who have much and more. And we pray that we would put feet to our faith, that we would demonstrate our faith in our willingness to be generous to those around us. Forgive us for the times that we think only of ourselves and getting ours and saving our own and putting our families first. When, Jesus, we know that ultimate faith is willing to give up what we have to be generous to others. We're so thankful that you are so generous to us, that you have come. You've died for us, giving up your very life out of generosity for us. We love you and we thank you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Isn't that a neat story? It has a lot of ways to read it, but I think there's one good takeaway at the end. We want to go to communion now. We want to remember the generosity of God as he laid down his life for all of us. We will have Billy's going to come on. He's going to play a song, and if you would like to take communion, you can do that, and then I'll come back on the screen and we'll wrap up with some announcements. Okay, let's go to communion.
Your faithfulness, oh God. You wrestle with the sinner's heart. You lead us by still waters into mercy, and nothing can keep us apart. So remember your people, remember your children, remember your promise, oh God. Your grace is enough, your grace is enough, your grace is enough for me. Your love and justice, God. You use the weak to lead the strong. You lead us in the song of your salvation, and all your people sing along. So remember your people, remember your children, remember your promise, oh God. Your grace is enough, your grace is enough, your grace is enough for me. Enough. Your grace is enough. Your grace is enough for me. So remember your people, remember your children, remember your promise, oh God. Your grace is enough. Your grace is enough. Your grace is enough for me. Yeah, your grace is enough. Heaven reaching down to us. Your grace is enough for me. for me. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's great, Billy. Appreciate that. A couple announcements we got here today. Some things that are going on. A lot of stuff is happening actually here as we get close. Now we're on the way to Easter, which is crazy. Unbelievable. First of all, if you want to come and visit us in person, we'd love to have you do that. You can stop by the gathering. We meet at 10 a.m. on Sundays in Everett at the Zion Lutheran Church building. And I mean, here online, it's great to have you involved here, but it is kind of a unique thing seeing these two groups come together. And if you have a chance, we'd love for you to check that out in person sometimes. If you want to keep up with what's happening, an easy way to do that is to follow us on all the socials, whatever one you're on. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and the new Threads. And if you want to find out information about what is happening, give us a follow on any of those social media channels. And that's an easy way for us to keep you updated on what's happening. Tonight, there is no student ministry because there is a Super Bowl going on. So disregard this screen right here, but I want to let you know that there is a Super Bowl happening today. So don't show up for student ministry because no one will be there. They're out watching the game, or maybe more importantly, the commercials. A couple other things that are happening. As I mentioned, we are doing an Ash Wednesday service this coming Wednesday at 6 p.m. It'll be kind of a cool traditional Ash Wednesday service. The Pathways Church has never done that before. Zion Lutheran has done it many times, and our own member of the gathering, Jan, will be leading us in this time. It'll be really, really fun, so we want to invite you to come to that if you would like to do that. Also coming up near the end of the month, the Pacifica Orchestra will be here at the building doing what is kind of like their spring concert. I don't know if we can call February spring. They call it their sunshine concert. I guess it's not quite warm enough for spring. So that'll be happening on Saturday, February 24th at 3 p.m. You can come and join the concert. They have some incredible music, and you can buy tickets at the door, $25 for general admission and $20 for students or seniors, and you will definitely be blessed by that. Also, if you want to give or donate, you can do that online. Easiest way to do it is go to our website, everettgathering.com/donate, and you can set up a one-time gift or a recurring gift. And there's so many of you that have been giving and so generously giving to this group, and we really appreciate that. Finally, we have an email newsletter. If you want to get all these announcements just emailed to your email box, you can sign up for that by messaging us on Facebook or messaging me. My email's on the screen there, and we would be happy to give you on that list so that you can get all the announcements right in your email inbox. Okay, I think that's it. So, Super Bowl is happening today. Hopefully you've got some beer and wings ready to roll, maybe some pizza. I don't know, whatever you're doing. Hopefully you have a fun time. You may not care about these two teams in the game. I really don't. But it is a good excuse to get together with some friends and have a fun time. So hopefully you got a chance to do that. And then next week, we'll be right back here continuing on with the Nameless Ones. Okay, hope you have a really good week. We'll see you next time. Bye.